Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of The Handy Philosopher. Um, some new readings on the 2019 VCE philosophy list, so I'll be doing a few recordings for those. Um, this first one is Smart's the aptly named Smart's sensations and brain processes. Okay, so. Uh, in class, we would have already talked about Descartes and the dualist argument in the mind-body debate. So hopefully you've had a look at that. You can check out the recordings to go through that as well. But essentially, Descartes is arguing that we exist as two separate things, a physical body, but our real level of existence is as a non-physical mind. That is the real you, in essence. What we're going to be seeing here from Smart is, at the time, a very progressive argument about the idea that actually you are really just your brain and the processes of your brain. Okay, so to provide a little bit of background, so Smart was part of a movement that became known as the Australian materialism movement. It might sound odd to us, but Australian philosophy has been a really big contributor, particularly in the mind-body debate, and still is with the work of people like David Chalmers, who's one of the world's primary dualist philosophers still today. But we've also been at the forefront of the materialism argument, and this has been for a very, very long time. Um, so Smart, as well as other philosophers, for those of you who did the old study design, David Armstrong was part of the Australian materialism movement, as well as other scientists and psychologists, all sort of developed this new idea that you are really just the processes of your brain. Now, I've got at the bottom of the slide there that this seems really obvious to us. Like, we're very familiar with the argument that you are really just the processes of your brain, and that things like sensory perception, well, this is actually just, electrical signals and chemicals in your brain. It gives you a sensation, but it's actually just a physical process. We're very familiar with this idea now, and with the weight of development in neuroscience, we know so much more about the brain now that we've got lots of evidence to support this idea. But in the 50s, when Australian materialism was sort of born, and Smart's text that we're going to be reading, Sensations and Brain Processes, was first published in 1959. This was a very revolutionary idea, and quite a controversial one as well. The world sort of wasn't ready for the idea that we might be just physical things, and to a certain degree still isn't. So we're going to be looking at that argument. So yeah, we need to understand Australian materialism is really the idea that everything we associate with the mind, whether it's consciousness or sensory perception or qualia or whatever other word we want to use for that, individual experience we have of our internal self, that is really actually just the brain. It is the brain going through processes, and that's it. Um, uh, Throughout this reading, Smart is going to be using or relying heavily on a principle referred to as Occam's razor. Now, Occam's razor is a principle that's used in lots of different disciplines. It's used in mathematics and in the sciences, particularly used in medicine. Occam's razor is used around diagnosing a patient. So in medicine, the basic principle is that if you can explain a patient's symptoms with a simple diagnosis, then don't then go looking for a really exotic and unlikely one. But in philosophy, really, the essence of Occam's razor and how Smart is going to be using it in this reading is that a simpler answer, so by simpler we mean one that leaves less questions unanswered or has fewer bits, so it's less complex, is to be preferred over an answer that has lots of questions still remaining, or lots of bits that need to be put together to actually get that to work. So SMART is going to be presenting the idea that the materialist argument is the far simpler one when you compare it to the dualist argument. It leaves less questions unanswered and it has far fewer bits. We don't have to create a whole another level of existence with this non-physical mind. We are just physical. There is one level of existence. So with that in mind, have your readers out. We're going right from the start. So you should have a title at the top, Sensations and Brain Processes. And in this first part of the reading, SMART is going to be looking at a few different ideas. So you can see them on the screen here. Expressivism, behaviorism, dualism. These are three different ideas for how the mind might exist, or rather might exist, how we explain the mind, before he gets to what he's going to be arguing for, which is, what we now call materialism. Okay. So here we go. Highlighters and pens at the ready. Suppose that I report that I have at this moment a roundish, blurry-edged after image, which is yellowish towards its edge and is orange towards its center. What is it that I am reporting? One answer to this question might be that I am not reporting anything, that when I say that it looks to me as though there is a roundish yellow-orange patch of light on the wall, I am expressing some sort of temptation. The temptation to say that there is a roundish yellow-orange patch on the wall, though I may know that there is not such a patch on the wall. I'll pause there for a moment. It's a bit of a weird way to start a reading, but I'm sure that we're all very familiar with that idea of, you look at like a bright light, or maybe even, you look at the sun and then like you close your eyes or you look at a wall or something and you can see kind of the residual image being projected like onto the wall. You can still see the outline of the sun on the wall. Or if you've ever done it, with light, you walk into a room that's really bright and you close your eyes and you can still see the outlines of the light. That's what SMART is talking about here. So this after image is, we now explain it as sort of a trace that's left on your retina. This is why your brain is still picking it up. But SMART is going to use this after image example to explain his view of materialism and why the other theories aren't as good at explaining things as materialism is. So you don't need to know too much about it, apart from that sensation that I'm sure you've all had. And if you haven't, go outside and look at the sun for a second and then look at a wall. You'll see it. You'll see the round sphere, of the after image of the sun. Okay, so continuing on. This is perhaps Wittgenstein's view in the Philosophical Investigations. Similarly, when I report a pain, I'm not really reporting anything, or if you like, I am reporting a queer sense of reporting, but I'm doing a sophisticated sort of wince. So see paragraph 244. The verbal expression of pain replaces crying and does not describe it, nor does it describe anything else. Here, we don't need to go too far into the history of the Wittgenstein's theories, but he's often credited with a school of thought, sometimes called expressivism. I've got it on the screen there, or the expressivist theory. And this is that sensations are not real, and our report of them is not actually a report of anything. We're not describing anything with our report. So it sounds a little bit weird, but when I say that, I can see a circle, the after image of the sun when I look at the wall, I'm not actually reporting anything. That circle's not really there. It's not real. With pain, whilst this one probably doesn't work quite as well because, pain is much more emotive, as SMART's going to be talking about in a moment. The pain itself isn't actually real. The cut is real. Like if I'm in pain from cutting myself, the cut is real, but the pain doesn't actually exist. It doesn't have any physical reality, just like the sun on the wall doesn't have any physical reality. Okay, so This idea, expressivism is basically the idea that internal sensations aren't real. They don't exist. So when I tell you what I am, say, thinking, um, I'm not actually telling you about anything real. It's not like me describing, say, a table to you. It's me telling you what I'm thinking about, but that thought isn't real, whereas the table is. So hopefully you can see that. Smart doesn't necessarily like this as an answer, and we'll explain why in a moment. Uh, um, I prefer most of the time to discuss an after image rather than a pain because the word pain brings in something which is irrelevant to my purpose, the notion of distress. I think that he is in pain entails he is in distress. That is, that he is in a certain agitation condition. Similarly, to say I am in pain may be to do more than replace pain behavior. It may be partly to report something, though this something is quite non-mysterious, being an agitation condition and so susceptible of behavioristic analysis. Now, very complex language being thrown around here by Smart, but the second theory, he's already moved on to the second theory on the screen here, which is behaviorism. Behaviorism is, look, essentially it's the idea that the mind is the same as behavior, as physical behavior. There's nothing beyond physical behavior. As it says there, there's no mystery that lies beyond behavior. Okay. Um, Smart as well doesn't necessarily like this idea, but just to explain it a little bit more, when he says agitation condition, what he means is that you've got a mental state that is likely to bring about agitation, which is a bit weird. Like our experience of our thoughts are that they're more there's more to them. Like the experience of thinking is more complex than just behavior waiting to happen, which is kind of what behaviorism is saying. Like, what is it when you feel anger? Well, a behaviorist would say that feeling angry is simply uh, angry behavior, say like punching a wall, waiting to happen. Now, it might not ever happen, but that's all that it is. Whereas our anger, when we experience anger as a mental process, it's not the same as punching a wall. That's not how anger feels to us. So, yeah, not a sort of perfect idea here. Yeah, we could go into behaviorism a lot more. If you really want to find out about it a bit more, you can check out some of the old David Armstrong recordings, who was also a Australian materialist, as I said before, and he talks about the problems with behaviorism as a theory to explain the mind as well. Smart and Armstrong sort of work together at times, so it makes sense that their theories are quite parallel. But yeah, this idea of an agitation condition, it's basically saying that our mental states are really just behavior or behavior waiting to happen if it hasn't happened yet, which, our mental states are more real to us than that. Continuing on, the suggestion I wish, if possible, to avoid is a different one, namely that I am in pain is a genuine report, and that what it reports is an irreducibly physical something. And similarly, the suggestion I wish to resist is also that to say I have a yellowish orange after image is to report something irreducibly physical. Sorry, not physical, psychical. Uh, Not physical, psychical. Psychical in terms of psychic. Okay, so that like mental phenomenon. Sorry, I'm misreading this as I'm going through it. So yeah, he's talking about like that. Yeah, this idea of psychic ability, some sort of extraordinary thing. So what he's saying is that when I say I'm in pain, what I mean is my non-physical mind is experiencing distress. Okay, how is it experiencing distress? Well, I don't know. It's non-physical, okay, or non-psychical. So yeah, this idea that, you know, well, it's the dualist argument, as it says on the screen there, that sensations are something else. Okay, and this is really what Smart is going to be arguing against. He doesn't agree with expressivism that, the mental phenomenon doesn't even exist, that it's not actually real, and he doesn't agree with behaviorism that the mental phenomenon is actually just behavior waiting to happen. It's sort of waiting in the wings. It's more real to us than that. But he doesn't want to fall into the trap of dualism, which is that, yes, the mental processes are real. So I just realized I had that box around that. Mental processes are real, and they exist as some, mystical, non-physical thing. Okay. He wants to avoid this and he wants to argue against it. Okay, so he's now going to present the fourth theory, which is the one that he's going to be agreeing with, which is materialism. Okay, why do I wish to resist this suggestion, as in the dualist argument? Mainly because of Occam's razor. It seems to me that science is increasingly giving us a view whereby organisms are able to be seen as physico-chemical mechanisms. It seems that even the behavior of a man himself will one day be explicable in mechanistic terms. I got there in the end. So a lot of Smart's argument, as a lot of materialist arguments, relies on the authority of science, which in itself is flawed, but this doesn't mean that it's a bad argument. All that it means is that basically Smart is saying if we agree with science, then we should agree with materialism, okay? Because the weight of scientific evidence is suggesting that everything in our world is really just a physical mechanism. And when we're talking about living things, living organisms, whether it's bacteria or whether it's a human being, that these really should be seen as physico-chemical mechanisms. And that we should be able to explain their behavior based on those mechanisms. In essence, we don't need to put a ghost into the machine, to borrow the phrase. He's freely admitting that science isn't there yet, but he's saying that give it a little bit more time and science will get there. Whether it's 10 years, 100 years, 1,000 years, who knows? It might even take 1,000,000 years of further scientific development. But by that point, we will be able to perfectly explain mental processes as purely physico-chemical mechanisms. If this seems unreasonable, keep in mind that there's lots of processes of the body that at one point were unexplainable. Until theories were developed and then proven through science to be correct. Even something that we see is so mundane now as like the circulation of the blood. Well, that was a real mystery for a long time. Now it's so straightforward. Okay, so scientific advancement is moving forward, and Smart is basically saying that given enough time, one day we're going to be able to explain the human experience in purely physico-chemical terms. Okay. There does seem to be, so far as science is concerned, nothing in the world but increasingly complex arrangements of physical constituents, all except for one place, in consciousness. So according to the more that we study science, the more we realize that the world is made up of physical parts. And if something is really complex, like a human being, then it's made of really complex parts. If things are really simple, like bacteria, then it's made of quite simple parts. But all of those parts are physical. Okay, it's kind of like a Lego set. You get a beginner's Lego set. It's got 15 pieces in it. They're all big. They're easy to put together. Then you go and buy the $15,000 Death Star. It's got 50,000 pieces and it's extraordinarily complex. They're still both made out of Lego. It's just that one's really complex and one's not. There's no magic in the Death Star. Okay, no more magic than is in the simple one, which is none. Okay. We can apply this to the idea of bacteria. People don't look at bacteria and go, oh, I wonder if there's like a soul, if it's got a soul, or if there's some sort of mental process. I mean, we don't even do this for most animals. No one steps on a cockroach and thinks, oh God, I wonder what happened to that cockroach's soul. Is there a cockroach afterlife? Will that cockroach be reunited with its ancestors? None of us think this. Okay. Um, and nor should we. Uh, but if we don't think it for a cockroach, really the only difference between us and a cockroach is that we're a more complex physical mechanism than it is. So why do we see ourselves as having something else when we don't see the cockroach as having something else? Okay. Um, a smart here has identified like the one thing that people say is non-physical, which is consciousness. So experience, that experience um, of your thoughts, your conscious experience. Okay, so all except for one place in consciousness. That is, for a full description of what is going on in a man, you would have to mention not only the physical processes in his tissue, glands, nervous system, and so forth, but also his states of consciousness. So this is the dualist argument that you exist, yes, you exist as the physical constituent parts, the very complex putting together of the biological organism that you are, but you also exist as something else, some non-physical entity. Okay, so his visual, auditory, and tactual sensations, his aches and pains, that these should be correlated with brain processes does not help. For to say that they are correlated is to say that they are something over and above. Now, this is important. This idea of correlation is something that Smart is going to talk about a little bit here. By saying that they're correlated, like when two things are correlated, they are two separate things. Okay. They're two things that match up with each other. So at the moment, the dualist argument that's presented by people like David Chalmers is this sort of correlation argument that when you think about something, okay, that correlates with certain brain processes. So when I'm thinking about, say a song that I really like, then my brain is going to fire in a certain way and certain chemicals are going to be released. But dualists are arguing that this is a correlation. Your experience of that, to use a modern term that's used a lot, qualia, your qualia of it is very different to your actual, like the actual brain processes. Okay, these are two separate things. It's just that they happen at the same time. Okay, what Smart is going to be suggesting here is they're not happening at the same time. They're the same thing. There isn't something else. This idea of over and above that Smart uses, there isn't something over and above the brain processes. Okay, it's just the brain processes. They are you thinking about the song. Okay, they're not a different thing altogether. So I'll change slides here because we've started talking about really Smart's core theory, which is that sensations are brain processes. Okay, so let's continue on. You cannot correlate something with itself. You correlate footprints with burglars, but not Bill Sykes the burglar with Bill Sykes the burglar. So hopefully that kind of makes it a little bit clearer. Where if I see footprints on the floor and there's stuff stolen in my house, I might correlate that to a burglar. But if I see a burglar, I don't think that could be a burglar. It's just that. It's not a separate thing. Okay. So sensations, states of consciousness, do seem to be the one sort of thing left outside the physicalist picture, and for various reasons, I just cannot believe that this can be so. So what Smart is saying here, this is really the Occam's razor part of the argument, is that everything else, absolutely everything else in existence, is explained using physical explanations. Molecules and atoms and subatomic particles, and all of this is physical. And yet then there's this one thing, consciousness, that we see as being different. Consciousness is somehow special. It's different from everything else. Really? Like this one thing is different? Do you have anything to prove that it's different? What Smart is saying here is, isn't it more likely that um, it's just physical as well? It is just brain processes. Okay? That everything should be explicable in terms of physics, together, of course, with descriptions of the way in which the parts are put together. Roughly, biology is to physics as radio engineering is to electromagnetism. Except the occurrence of sensations seems to me to be frankly unbelievable. Um, so it is this idea that, yeah, well, really, he's repeating what I've just said, which is that we explain everything else with physical theories except consciousness. Why? Why is it that we explain consciousness as something else? Everything else we explain using the laws of physics and what we understand about biology, and chemistry for that matter, um, except consciousness. Really? As he says, he finds it to be frankly unbelievable. It seems almost silly to suggest that there is this like other level. So such sensations would be nomological danglers. Now, this is a little bit weird, this idea of nomological danglers. It's right in the middle of the slide there, but he's using it to critique dualism. In other words, what he's saying is that, so what we're really saying is we've got absolutely everything in existence on one side, and then we've got consciousness or sensation just on its own over here in a completely different category. Okay, we've got absolutely everything in the world on the physical side of things, and then sensation all on its own in this totally different category. Um, so this nomological dangler, okay, it exists outside of the explanation and definitions of absolutely everything else. Okay, Smart sort of saying, doesn't this seem unlikely? Um, so such sensations would be nomological danglers, to use Fegel's expression. It is not often realized how odd would be the laws whereby these nomological danglers would dangle. It is sometimes asked, why can't there be psychophysical laws which are of a novel sort or a new sort, just as the laws of electricity and magnetism were novelties from the standpoint of Newtonian mechanics? Certainly, we are pretty sure in the future to come across new ultimate laws of a novel type. What he's saying here is the process of science, and you can read Thomas Kuhn's Structure of Scientific Revolution to get a great explanation of this. But the process of science is one whereby we develop new laws, and they take over from the old ones, and they better explain things. Okay, so novel is just a different word for new, so they will be new laws. But I expect them to relate simple constituents. For example, whatever ultimate particles are then in vogue. So really, this is the sort of the dot point, the second last dot point where it's got firstly. This would require the laws of science, etc. What Smart is saying is that there are some people who say, well, why not? Why is it impossible for us to live in a universe where absolutely everything is explained physically and everything is defined and categorized physically, except for this one thing as sensation? Couldn't one day the laws of science be rewritten to actually allow that? Now, look, is this possible? 0.00001% in reality, because whilst scientific revolution does happen and old theories get thrown out and replaced with newer, better theories, they always move towards sort of a simpler explanation for things, not a more complex one. Imagine opening up the newspaper tomorrow and saying, physicists discover entirely new level of reality that isn't physical, can't be measured physically in any other way, but is known. How? How the hell do you know? It can't be measured in any physical way. So this is, super weird. And Smart is just pointing that out. Like, A change in the laws of science like that would be so fundamental that it wouldn't just change science, it would destroy it. All scientific advancement up to this point would be almost irrelevant, because we'd now have to search for these ghosts in everything, these non-physical ghosts or these nomological danglers. Okay. It seems that this is unlikely. I cannot believe that ultimate laws of nature could relate simple constituents to configurations consisting of perhaps billions of neurons and goodness knows how many billions of ultimate particles, all put together for all the world as though their main purpose in life was to be a negative feedback mechanism of a complicated sort. So this is the second issue that Smart has with the dualist argument. Because the dualist argument is basically that your mind, your non-physical mind, is the thing that's doing all the work. That's where the thinking is happening. That's where you experience the sensations. Like that's the qualia. Okay, that's where the action is. Okay, the Cartesian theater. But then we've got this brain in our head that's made of, what, approximately 80 billion neurons, give or take. But not only that, is also then creating over a trillion connections between those neurons in your brain, like the most complex organism that we know of. And actually, this is basically like an antenna. That's all it's doing. It's like the antenna that's sitting on your roof that allows you to watch TV. Really? Like this extraordinarily complex brain is there purely to receive the messages from the mind? Really? It couldn't have been designed simpler? Um, Smart just thinks that this is like basically to the point of being unreasonable. Like, uh, this our brain for him is more than an antenna. It is more than just receiving things from something else. Otherwise, it wouldn't have to be as complex as it is. Okay. Um, So such ultimate laws would be like nothing so far known in science. They have a queer smell to them. I'm just unable to believe in the nomological danglers themselves, or in the laws whereby they would dangle. If any philosophical argument seemed to compel us to believe in such things, I would suspect a catch in the argument. In any case, it is the object of this paper to show that there are no philosophical arguments which compel us to be dualists. So this is really the purpose of what Smart is writing for. He's shown you a few problems, but what he's really going to be outlining is why you shouldn't be a dualist, why you should be a materialist. Okay. So yeah, he's already identified a couple of issues with the dualist argument. He's going to go on to continue. So we go over the page now. We skip a little bit in the middle. So I'll just change the slides here. It's going to be a little bit weird. This next section, what Smart is going to be talking about is basically that the issue that people have with explaining the mind as the brain is really more of a problem with language than it is with the theory itself. It's that when we use language, there's a concept that is, well, not a concept, but we call this value-laden language. So when I use a word, it has a particular meaning in your head, and it's impossible for you to hear that word without also expecting that meaning. And that's going to bring with it all of these, like, sort of footnotes that carry along with it. Okay. And so the issue that we've got with explaining something like mental processes or sensations, as Smart uses the word, that internal experience of consciousness, is that when we try and explain it, we end up using really value-laden language that is quite imperfect. And so it brings with it these ideas of like a non-physicalness, or, the ghost in the machine, as I've said before, when it really doesn't need to. Okay, so this is what we mean by linguistic differences. Okay, the problem is not in the theory, the problem is in the language that we use to explain the theory. So continuing on, why should not sensations just be brain processes of a certain sort? There are, of course, well-known as well as lesser-known philosophical objections to the view that reports of sensations are reports of brain processes. But I shall try to argue that these arguments are by no means as cogent as is commonly thought to be the case. So remember, cogency is about the internal strength of the argument. Do the premises put together result in the conclusion? Okay. So what Smart is saying here is, well, I'm going to talk about these objections to materialism. Sorry if you can hear the bell in the background. I'm recording this one at school. But yeah, I'm going to talk about the objections that people raise to materialism and show that the arguments that are there are actually quite weak. Okay, so let me first try to state more accurately the thesis that sensations are brain processes. This is not the thesis that, for example, after image or ache means the same as brain processes of sort X. In other words, it is not me saying that when I have the after image on the wall, this is the same as my retina doing this and releasing this and sending this message, like the actual physical processes of it. Okay. Where X is replaced by a description of a certain sort of brain process. So, the release of chemicals or an electrical impulse or whatever. It is that insofar as after image or ache is a report of a process, it is a report of a process that happens to be a brain process. It follows that the thesis does not claim that sensation statements can be translated into statements about brain processes, nor does it claim that the logic of a sensation statement is the same as that of a brain process statement. All it claims is that insofar as a sensation statement is a report of something, that something is in fact a brain process. So that sentence itself is probably the clearest definition of Smart's materialist view. Okay, so I'd definitely be cracking out the highlighter for that one. All it claims is that insofar as a sensation statement is a report of something, that something is in fact a brain process. Okay, so what he's saying here is that when I look at the sun and then I look at the wall and I can see the after image of the sun, I can see that circle, and then it slowly begins to fade. When I am talking about that, I might feel like I'm describing something else, but what I'm actually describing is the sensation of the brain process. Okay, when my brain does this is how it appears to me. Okay, when my brain receives this message from my retina in my eye, this is how it appears to me. When my brain receives a message from my leg that it has been cut, this is how it appears to me. So when I'm describing sensations, I'm describing what it's like to have a brain process, not what it's like to have some sort of magic non-physical process. Okay. Sensations, I'm going to rip through this part very quickly, because as Smart himself, I don't want to disparage a truly great man, but he probably should have edited this out because as he himself identifies, it's a poor analogy. But sensations are nothing over and above brain processes. So again, this idea of over and above. Sensations aren't different to brain processes. They are brain processes. Okay. Nations are nothing over and above citizens, but this does not prevent the logic of nation statements being very different from the logic of citizen statements, nor does it ensure the translatability of nation statements into citizen statements. So this is, we might call this the nation analogy. In other words, I might be able to talk about a nation in a certain way, but it would be wrong for me to talk about the citizens of that nation in that way, and vice versa. Okay. So I might say something like, the citizens overthrew the government. And this makes perfect sense. Okay, this happens sometimes. But it would be wrong for me to say the nation overthrew the government. Well, that doesn't make sense. Okay. So yeah, this is really what he's saying. But his key point is, even though I can't use that sort of language, they are actually the same thing. A nation is simply the grouping of the citizens, but I can't actually describe them the same way, even though they're the same thing. This is what we're talking about with the mind and brain processes. They're exactly the same thing, but I can't explain them the same way. Okay, I can't use the same language to describe them. So where were we up to? I do not, however, wish to assert that the relation of sensation statements to brain process statements is very like that of nation statements to citizen statements. So again, he should have edited the whole section out. Nations do not just happen to be nothing over and above citizens. For example, I bring in the nations example merely to make a negative point. That the fact that the logic of A statements is different from that of B statements does not ensure that A's are anything over and above B's. So, for example, just because I can't describe something as A doesn't mean that it's different. Just because I can't describe A and B in exactly the same way doesn't mean that A and B are actually different things. If that sounds really confusing, I'll give you an example. Clark Kent wears glasses. Superman does not wear glasses. Therefore, Clark Kent is different to Superman. Well, no, they're not. They're the same thing. We know that Clark Kent is Superman. And so this is the issue that we've got, right? This is like, so when he was talking about cogency before, this is highlighting a lack of cogency in the dualist argument. What they are saying is, I cannot describe mental processes in the same way that I described physical processes. Therefore, mental processes must be something different from physical processes. Well, not necessarily. It doesn't entail that just because I can't describe something the same way, that it's not the same thing. Okay? It just means that our language falls short. Clark Kent is Superman. And the fact that we can't describe them in a similar way does not make it necessary that they are two different things. Okay. So remarks on identity. So here, Smart is quite famous for excuse me, what's called his identity theory. So he's going to be talking about that here, and we'll get this idea of strict identity. He's not saying that sensations are like or similar to or happen at the same time as brain processes. He is offering a strict identity. Sensations are brain processes. They are one and the same thing. Okay, so remarks on identity. When I say that a sensation is a brain process or that lightning is an electrical discharge, I am using is in the sense of strict identity. Just as in this case, necessary proposition 7 is identical with the smallest prime number greater than 5. When I say that a sensation is a brain process or that lightning is an electrical discharge, I do not mean just that the sensation is somehow spatially or temporally continuous with the brain process, or that the lightning is just spatially or temporally continuous with the discharge. So just to pause for a moment, spatially means, well, space, not outer space, but space, so the physical, like, location of something. And temporally it just means time. So what he's saying here is, I do not mean that the space, that the sensation is somehow happening in a different place or space or a different time, continuous with the brain process, or that lightning is just spatially or temporally continuous with the discharge. So he's not saying that these are two things that just happen to be happening at the same time. What he's saying is there's only one thing. All of this is happening at one time. That's it. Okay. So they're not spatially and temporally continuous. They are the same thing. Okay. If this sounds a bit weird, it would be like saying, when Beyonce sings a song, this is happening spatially and temporally at the same rate as the words are coming out of her mouth. Okay, so what I'm really saying here is when Beyonce sings, this is happening as the same time as words are coming out of her mouth. What? Her singing is words coming out of her mouth. That's what it is. Okay, there's not something else. That's what singing is. The example with lightning on the slide at the moment, I think, is a good one. That lightning is an electrical discharge. It's not happening at the same time as an electrical discharge. That's what the electrical discharge is. It's lightning. Okay, so um, yeah, not just happening in the same place or time, but that's all that it is. So sensation is brain processes. It's not happening at the same time as it just is. When, on the other hand, I say that the successful general is the same person as the small boy who stole the apples, I mean only that the successful general I see before me is a time slice of the same four-dimensional object of which the small boy stealing apples is an earlier time slice. Bit weird here, but he's basically saying, imagine a child who steals apples. That child then grows up to become a successful military general. When I look at the general, I can say, well, this is the same person as the little boy who stole the apples. Now, when I look at him, he's not a little boy, he's a man. He's not stealing apples now, he's a military general. But we fully understand this concept that, well, yeah, he's the same person. Okay, so this idea of a time slice, I'm just picking a different time period. You are the same person who woke up this morning, even though the time period is different. Okay. However, the four-dimensional object which has the general I see before me for its late time slice is identical in the strict sense with the four-dimensional object which has the small boy stealing apples for its early time slice. I distinguish these two senses of is identical with because I wish to make it clear that the brain process doctrine asserts identity in the strict sense. So what he's like, don't worry about the general example too much, but what he's really saying is he's trying to highlight to you how sort of firm, for lack of a better term, his view on sensation and brain processes is. These aren't like each other. They're not happening at the same time as each other. They are actually one thing. They're not two things. They're one thing. You can call it sensation or you can call it brain processes. These are two words that we use for exactly the same thing. Okay. If some of you know me as Mr. Hands and some of you know me as Adam. That doesn't mean that there's two different things. Okay. It means that there is one thing. We just call it two different things. Okay. I am not happening at the same place and time as Adam. I am Adam. Okay. So hopefully that makes sense. We'll leave the first recording there for Smart. The next section is basically like that's his thesis that he's offered. This sensation is brain processes. We're going to look at a few objections and his replies to them. So how he deals with those objections next. So yeah, hope you enjoyed it. Get around the Aussies. Isn't it nice to know that, Australian philosophers have had such a big impact on the world. I so proud. So I hope you have a great day. Like and subscribe as always, and hit that bell icon so you get notified when I do the next Smart reading. Okay, see you later.